Welcome to The Definitive Wrap, where we report the truth about American exceptionalism. We love our flag, we love our country, and we believe in America. The Definitive Wrap, where we respect people of faith, the men and women in blue, and our support for Israel. And now, your host, Bela Seabrow, on The Definitive Wrap.
Hello, and welcome to The Definitive Wrap. I am Bela Seabrow. If you have been following international news, supporters of the East Turkish National Awakening movement recently rallied outside the White House to urge the U.S. to end trade deals with China and take action to stop the oppression of Uyghur and other Turkic people of East Turkestan. I'm talking about forced labor, excessive surveillance, torture, sexual violence, organ harvesting, and executions. We will hear more about this from our distinguished guest, Salih Hudayar, who was elected as the Prime Minister of the East Turkestan government in exile on November 11, 2019. Mr. Salih Hudayar was born to a Uyghur business family in Atush, East Turkestan. He studied international studies and politics at the University of Oklahoma and was a member of the Army National Guard from 2011 to 2013. He's currently pursuing a master's in national security studies from the American Military University. On June 4th, 2000, Salih Hudayar fled to the United States with his family, where they became political refugees. He grew up in Oklahoma, and despite being so young, he began to spread awareness about East Turkestan and the situation there. He moved to Washington, D.C. in summer 2017 and founded the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement, ETNAM, under his leadership. And that's where the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement sparked a national awakening across East Turkestani diaspora and reignited the flame of independence. He spearheaded the call for restoring East Turkestan's independence, along with calling for the passage of a Uyghur East Turkestan Policy Act. He reframed the East Turkestan issue as being an issue of territory and independence and not simply human rights and democracy. He joined the East Turkestan government in exile at the special parliamentary session in Washington, D.C. in April 2019. And he was subsequently appointed as the ambassador to the United States and assistant to the Prime Minister. Since becoming a member of the East Turkestan government in exile, Salih Hudayar has continued advocating for democracy, political independence, and unity among our people. He has also been active in promoting nonviolent resistance to Chinese occupation among the Uyghur and East Turkestani diaspora. His vision is for an independent East Turkestan that is democratic, pluralistic, and peaceful. He envisions that East Turkestan will one day be a shining example of democracy and human rights in not only Central Asia, but also the entire world. Mr. Hudayar is fluent in Uyghur, Turkish, and English. He is married and currently resides with his wife in Northern Virginia. Mr. Hudayar, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, with great honor, please, I welcome you to The Definitive Wrap.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Hudayar, there are people living in the United States that have no clue about the oppressions that exist in the world. And I understand that China is using its social media platforms that are banned inside China to spread propaganda and manipulate the world's public opinion on its repression of Muslims in East Turkestan. Please tell us about what is really going on, specifically about the genocide and crimes against humanity.
Yes. Firstly, thank you for giving me this opportunity to shed some light on the plight of East Turkestan and its people and the ongoing genocide. The story, or the East Turkestan-Sino conflict, essentially dates back to 1949. In late 1949, following the establishment of the People's Republic of China by the Chinese Communists, they invaded East Turkestan and overthrew the independent East Turkestan Republic, leading to essentially a long campaign of colonization an occupation which continues to this day. In 2014, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, the Chinese government launched the so-called People's War campaign against Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, where they subsequently sent at least 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples, according to the US Department of Defense, to concentration camps, or what the Chinese government calls vocational training and re-education camps. In these camps, the Chinese government began to subject Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples to forced indoctrination, torture, forced sterilization, organ harvesting, rape and sexual abuse, and forced labor. What the Chinese government has been doing has been recognized as genocide by the US government, as well as the parliaments of Canada, the UK, the EU Parliament, France, and many other European countries. And this is essentially the worst case of an attack against a specific ethnic or religious group by any power since the Holocaust. And essentially, what the Chinese government's end game here in targeting the people of East Turkestan, as it's been made very specific in leaked Chinese government documents and statements, is that it's about controlling East Turkestan's territory and preventing the independence of East Turkestan as dictated under China's national defense strategy. The Chinese government essentially aims to eradicate both, both physically and culturally, the existence of Uyghur and other Turkic peoples in East Turkestan, and to replace East Turkestan, the identity and East Turkestani people with Chinese colonists.
So all these crimes against humanity should have implications on international law. So what is being done?
Absolutely. Everything that China is doing is defined as genocide under the UN Genocide Convention of 1948. The governments and the parliaments that have recognized it as genocide, including the US government, under the UN Genocide Convention, have treaty obligation to not only prevent, but also to punish those who perpetrate the crime of genocide. Unfortunately, we have not gotten to any significant amount of preventing or even punishing this crime of genocide. The US government has issued sanctions. The UK and other European countries have also issued sanctions against, mid-level Chinese officials, but nothing substantive has been done beyond that. And what needs to be done is that the United States and other members like France and the UK, who are members of the UN Security Council, need to bring this to the agenda of the UN Security Council, to bring the East Turkestan issue to the agenda of the UN Security Council. They need to urge the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to investigate and prosecute Chinese officials and the Chinese state for their role in the ongoing genocide, as well as, they need to engage in punitive diplomatic measures, which includes, if necessary, cutting diplomatic ties, banning all products that are made made in China as a result with Uyghur and other Turkic people's forced or slave labor, and they need to, uphold the UN's own declaration on granting independence to colonized nations and peoples. The fact that East Turkestan is facing this genocide, there's no doubt that what the Chinese government is doing in East Turkestan is colonization in the 21st century. The name Xinjiang, which the Chinese government refers to East Turkestan, to describe East Turkestan, literally translates in the Chinese language as the colony or the new territory, signifying that this is indeed not a part of China, and it is indeed an occupied country. So there's a lot that needs to be done. It's up to the conscience of these countries, especially those leaders who are heading these countries, to act before it's too late.
President Biden has not yet called out China for their genocide and slavery, has he?
The Biden administration, they followed through with the Trump administration's recognition of the atrocities as genocide. However, President Biden himself has not specifically called out China on the Uyghur genocide that is happening in East Turkestan.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's many speculations regarding this. One, the fact that the U.S. Still has not, the U.S. government still, we believe, does not have a real strategy or vision on how they want to proceed, move forward in regards to China. So they are still, trying to appease China in many ways to prevent it from, quote, becoming angry, so they can back channel diplomatic talks and cut a deal. That's what we think is the issue. And then there's other issues, being that the president has the eyes and ears of individuals, elites who have economic and other ties, business ties to China.
So it's a money reason?
I mean, we think that might be part of the problem, is the fact that there are, individuals in the administration, or people close to the administration that have a lot of economic dealings with China. And secondly, it's also because we believe that the U.S. doesn't have a concrete strategy on how to deal with China. They haven't yet formally recognized China as a threat to U.S. national security, as as an enemy at this point, or an adversary. At this point, it's still the narrative is that China is a competitor, when in reality, China is not simply a competitor. Its aim is to replace the United States and other nations in the free world as the sole global superpower. And time is running out for both the United States and the free world, but especially for the people of East Turkestan and other peoples like Tibet, Southern Mongolia, and others who are suffering under the occupation and colonization of China.
Is there anybody, and if so, who is working to undo and reverse the false narratives and propaganda?
Well, right now, the U.S. government, the State Department's Center for Global Engagement recently published a report highlighting the fact that the Chinese government is manipulating the global public opinion regarding East Turkestan. However, beyond publishing this report, nothing has been really done. This is a great first step, but there needs to be more actions to combat, to push back against China's malign efforts to manipulate global opinion. And one of the basic things that they can do is to, one, put pressure on Western-based social media companies like Twitter, like Facebook, Instagram, and others, all of which are banned in China, but the Chinese government uses excessively to promote its propaganda and to deny the atrocities. So one is to pressure on them to, prevent the Chinese government from using their platforms for disinformation campaigns. Secondly, it's to, U.S. government needs to support entities, East Turkestani entities like the government in exile, the East Turkestan government in exile, and the East Turkestan National Awakening Movement to help, push back against China's false narratives, through research, through public awareness, and other means.
So I get that, social media platforms such as Twitter are banned in China. I get that. But what about the people who live in other countries, such as the United States? Why is the truth not out there the way it should be, the way I know about it, the way other people know about it? Why isn't it out there as public knowledge? I mean,
Well,
for heaven's
I mean,
sake, we're living in different worlds today. This is not 100 years ago. Everything is
yes,
out in the open. I mean, people know what somebody else is having for breakfast.
yes. I mean, surely over the past few years, there has been more public knowledge about the atrocities, about the ongoing genocide in East Turkestan, but it's still, as you stated earlier, most Americans are still unfamiliar with it. And part of the reason is that many mainstream medias and outlets, they're afraid to publish the truth because of their business ties with China, or the fact that the Chinese government will, for example, if let's say CNN was to publish something, about the historical narrative, the historical facts regarding East Turkestan and how it fell under, Chinese occupation, the Chinese government would probably prevent, their journalists from reporting in China. So these are issues. And then you have newspapers and other media outlets that are being, uh, essentially bought in many ways. The Chinese government is buying their influence, buying ads. So it's all about the money, unfortunately, at the end of the day.
And what about those that are not affected by the money, that don't have any business dealings? There's so many journalists out there, freelance
Well,
journalists.
and I think as far as them, it's again they're not fully aware of what's happening in East Turkestan, or that they don't see that it's in their interest to publish it. There are many other things happening across the world. Things come up every day, and so because they're unaware about the whole situation, they decide not to write about it, or they ignore it because something else comes up in some other part of the world that they think will gain more traction. And at the end of the day, this also has to do with policymakers. If politicians, if governments raised this issue and they highlighted the situation happening in East Turkestan consecutively, and they made it, a key foreign policy priority to address this issue, you would have, media reporting about it consistently, like the way that they report on uh, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or other situations that are happening in other parts of the world, or the situation that's happening in the tensions between China and Taiwan. It's all about policymakers as well. Like if they're not outspoken about it, then there's not going to be much coverage by or interest by the media and then by the public.
Please tell us about China's forced labor camps in East Turkestan. So
So the
explain to our
Chinese
audience what's going on in those camps, and how are people sent there? How are they deported to these camps? Or are they fooled? Please run us by the steps that are used to imprison those people.
So in 2014, the People's Republic of China launched the so-called People's War Campaign against so-called terrorism, extremism, and separatism. In this, the Chinese government, they came up with, I believe there's over 48 official reasons for which one was determined disloyal and needed to be sent to these so-called vocational re-education concentration camps. In this, anyone who had contacts with anyone overseas, anyone who believed in a religion or practiced a religion, anyone who used VPN or had even WhatsApp, or knew someone who had WhatsApp or who had traveled overseas. These were all the excuses that the Chinese government used. I mean, as simple as having facial hair, or having refusing to even smoke cigarette or drink alcohol were seen as signs of extremism or terrorism by the Chinese government. If you were an individual and you worked out, you were described as a terrorist and had to be sent to these re-education, vocational training concentration camps. The Chinese government itself stated in a September 2020 white paper that it sent on average 1.29 million people per year since 2014 to 2019 to so-called vocational training and re-education camps, where they were, uh, de-radicalized is the term that they use, and given jobs and become better citizens and to become loyal to the Chinese state. Uh, that's roughly about 7.8 million people over the course of 6 years, and this campaign is still continuing to this day. People in these camps, they're selected on their level of loyalty. Those that are disloyal are sentenced to anywhere from 5 years to life in prison. Some are even executed, while the other ones that the Chinese government thinks they can re-educate or control or manipulate, they send them to work in factories, producing anything from textiles to computer parts to car parts, inside East Turkestan, or in Chinese factories inside China, where they're essentially sold in large batches. We have 50 to 100 Uyghurs being sold to Chinese companies as slave labor, and this is something that's continuing even right now as we speak. However, the U.S. government has implemented the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which targets, which bans any goods made with the forced labor or suspected of being made with forced labor in East Turkestan from coming into the United States. But this
So
is
how do
not.
they know? Because I was about to ask that question. When we purchase merchandise or any kind of product, how do we know here in the United States that it wasn't a result of forced labor?
So
What
that's
I'm
very
buying. I mean, how do I know? How does anybody know?
so that's very difficult to assess, given the fact that majority of the companies in East Turkestan have affiliations or business dealings with the XPCC, or the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which is a 3.5 million strong paramilitary force specifically sent to East Turkestan to colonize East Turkestan, and they are the enforcers of the concentration camps and the slave labor that is going on in East Turkestan today. Majority of the people that they use, the Uyghurs, there's no doubt they are being, used as slave labor or forced labor. They're not, being used in their own will. They're not working or being employed in their own will.
Yeah, they're not
So
employees clocking in and out and getting paid at the end of the day or the end
yeah,
of the week.
they're kept in these concentration camp facilities. They're made to work, 14 to 16 hours a day. Other part of that, they have no contact with their family members. They're in, these facilities that have, high walls, razor, wires, barbed wires, and watchtowers. These aren't, vocational training facilities. These
Right.
are concentration camps. Essentially, and they're not being paid, or even if they are being paid, it's far below what the normal Chinese worker would make.
Right. And how old are these prisoners?
Well, according to the leaked documents, for example, earlier, a couple months back, the BBC, they released the data of some 200,000 plus Uyghurs who had been Chinese police files that had been hacked. They published them, of over 200,000 Uyghurs between the ages of 15 all the way up to their 80s. Both the youngest one was a 15-year-old woman, the oldest one was some 80 something year old elderly grandmother, who had been taken into these camps and prisons, and essentially, some were used as slave labor, some were used as, sent to prison. Uh, so based on this data, and of over 2,000 of them, 2,800 of them, there are pictures, and all their data was, public revealed. So from that, we know that it doesn't matter if you're a woman or if you're a young woman, as young as a teenager, or an elderly grandmother, or if you're a young man or an elderly grandfather, you are being sent to these prisons and these camps under bogus charges. For example, having too many children. Some women were sent because they had so-called too many children. Having more than two children was their crime. Some went to prison. In the case of an elderly woman, she went into prison on the basis that she told her son to not smoke or drink, which was seen as a sign of extremism. Um, Others, just because they had learned how to read a religious text, they were deemed as extremists, and that's why, like in the case of the 15-year-old young girl, all she had was she had learned how to read religious text, and that was the basis on which they imprisoned her.
This is heartbreaking. Are these prisoners given food on a regular basis?
So, based on the testimonies of a few survivors who have managed to flee East Turkestan, and some who are residing here in the U.S., some in Europe, they're given minimal amounts of food, barely watered down soups and some pieces of bread on a daily basis. They're in very cramped, tight conditions. Um, where you can't even stretch and lay down to sleep. Um, and constantly, according to their testimonies and their experiences, women are being raped by Chinese security forces, and they're being constantly injected with unknown medication.
You mean medical experiments?
We believe that that could be very well the case, because some people are disappeared, others their organs are being harvested, and we have physical
Tell us
evidence.
about the organ harvesting, please.
So the Chinese government, since the 80s, had been harvesting the organs of initially political prisoners, mostly of prisoners who they would execute, and majority of this organ harvesting took place in East Turkestan. Especially post 2014, the organ harvesting market industry has boomed in the fact that the Chinese government is selling the organs of Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples who are predominantly Muslim as so-called halal organs to wealthy Muslims from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. So to accommodate this, to accommodate the demand, and to make the process more rapid, the Chinese government, there are evidence that they have built crematoriums across near some of these concentration camps, and there are there's evidence of special, lanes at airports near these concentration camps in East Turkestan that state for organ transplants only. So this is indeed happening. We had testimonies of Chinese nurses and doctors who were working in some of these
They
facilities.
facilitated in those procedures.
Yes,
I imagine they fled the country. They're not living there now. If they're
yes.
giving testimony, are they?
One of the surgeons who was also Uyghur, who was involved in this process. He since fled. He's been in the UK for about a decade. He fled years back, and gave numerous testimony about the organ harvesting. Back then, it was the Chinese government would target mostly political prisoners. Now it's to where it's almost essentially everyone, because all Uyghurs are essentially being treated as political prisoners and enemies of the state by the Chinese government.
And so when this happens to a prisoner, I guess they don't return the body to the family. They cremate them, correct?
No, absolutely not. They don't. Not only do they not return the body to the family, there's evidence that these bodies are being cremated, and there's also, further humiliation upon the family of the victim. For example, they will send a bill to the family's next, their closest relatives or next of kin, stating that we want you to pay the bill for the cost of the bullet and the execution.
I'm speechless. And if the family refuses to pay the bill, they become prisoners too?
Yes, unfortunately, that's another, tactic. It's to further humiliate and demoralize the family. And if those who refuse to pay the bill, they are sent to prison for that excuse. And aside from what's happening inside the camps, there's a similarly dire situation happening outside of the camps. You have millions of Chinese officials living in the homes of Uyghurs whose husbands have been taken to these prisons, whose husbands, sons, or fathers have been taken into these prisons and camps, and sleeping with them even to quote build unity amongst the ethnic groups. There's widespread of cases of rape by Chinese security forces and Chinese officials. Young Uyghur and other Turkic women are being coerced to marry Chinese men in an effort to breed out our population. And those who refuse to marry Chinese men, they're threatened with, we're going to send your entire family to the concentration camps and prisons if you don't. So this is all a very tragic thing that is happening, unforeseen, in the timelines of history. Right now, under the guise of COVID lockdowns, the Chinese government has thrown Uyghurs out of their homes to where they are living in the streets, and people are starving. And this is part of the Chinese government's efforts to slowly kill off our people, without the use of having to use bullets and guns and bombs, but using biological weapons, bringing inflicting conditions on them to where they will die of starvation, of disease, and so forth.
I'm so sorry to hear all this. Mr. Hudayar, thank you for joining us today and bringing the truth about these atrocities to the forefront.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to VIN News for hosting our show, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. God bless you.
Thanks for listening to The Definitive Wrap with your host, Bela Seabrow. Be sure to tell your family and friends they also can catch The Definitive Wrap on Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, and your favorite streaming service. See you next time on The Definitive Wrap.